2 years. The same suite, the same green tea, the same 7:14 a.m., and she never once asked who he really was. He never offered. That arrangement worked perfectly for both of them, right up until the morning it didn't, and a man in a brand new blazer made the single most expensive mistake of his career without knowing it. This is the story of how a paper crane changed what both of them thought they deserved. Creston Bay is a city draped in the illusion of tranquility. To the casual observer, it is a picturesque coastal enclave defined by sailboats and old money mansions, but beneath the salt air veneer, the city runs on a clandestine currency of unspoken debts and leveraged favors. It is a place where power doesn't always shout, often, it simply whispers from the shadows of a corner booth. Kiana Dale understood this architecture better than most. As the lead concierge at the Harborview Grand, her life was a relentless high-wire act of split shifts and suppressed exhaustion. She returned every night to a cramped apartment where her younger sister, Bria, had colonized the pull-out couch with neon nail lacquer and law school textbooks she rarely opened. Their rent was a recurring monthly miracle, always almost fine, maintained solely by Kiana's uncanny ability to anticipate the whims of people who looked through her as if she were made of glass. Among the rotating cast of demanding socialites and insecure executives, Marcus CO was the only guest who felt heavy. Not loud, just heavy. He checked into Suite 1408 every third week, registering as MCO, consultant, a title as minimalist as his tailored charcoal suits. He never complained, never engaged in lobby small talk, and tipped in crisp $100 bills that smelled faintly of cedar. He required exactly one thing: green tea, brewed with loose leaves, delivered to his door at 7:14 a.m. sharp. Not 7:15. Not 7:13. For 2 years, Kiana had been the silent architect of this 60-second ritual. At 7:14, the door would open, a manicured hand would take the tray, and a nod would be exchanged. He never spoke, yet in the chaotic ocean of her job, Marcus was the only fixed point. She found it peaceful, a shared respect for precision that required no words. The only crack in his impenetrable mask appeared on Tuesday mornings. Despite his terrifyingly composed aura, Marcus was currently engaged in a losing war with a small, wilting succulent on his desk. "It's dying," Marcus said that morning, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that usually made port authorities tremble. Kiana glanced at the sad plant. "It's a cactus, Mr. CO. You're overwatering it." "I gave it a teaspoon of bottled Evian," he countered, looking genuinely wounded. "I've negotiated international treaties. Why is this plant resisting me?" "Because it's a plant, not a subordinate," Kiana replied, moving the pot into the sunlight. "Ignore it for a week. It thrives on neglect." Marcus looked at her then, a sharp, obsidian gaze that seemed to calculate her entire soul. "Neglect," he repeated softly. "I'm not very good at that." Kiana laughed, the sound bright against the heavy silence of the suite. She didn't realize that Marcus was currently memorizing the exact frequency of that laugh. She didn't know that within 48 hours, she would be fired in the lobby. And she certainly didn't know that the man who couldn't keep a cactus alive was about to dismantle a general manager's life without ever raising his voice. The peace of Suite 1408 didn't last. 2 days after the cactus incident, the heavy silence Kiana shared with Marcus was shattered by the arrival of a man who moved like a landslide in a polyester suit. Bryce Calloway had received his promotion to general manager, and he intended to make sure every square inch of the Harborview Grand felt the weight of his new authority. His first executive act was to rearrange the lobby's heirloom mahogany tables into a collaborative flow that forced guests to walk in zigzags, followed immediately by firing the city's most beloved bellman for wearing the wrong shade of black socks. By noon, he had unveiled a gold leaf name placard for his desk with a font size so aggressive it practically shouted his arrival from across the mezzanine. Bryce was a man whose entire personality was a business-casual blazer, and he viewed Kiana's competence as a personal insult to his own mediocrity. On Bryce's 4th day, the tension reached its breaking point. A high-tier VIP guest, emboldened by 3 midday martinis and a lifetime of unchecked entitlement, reached across the concierge desk. His hand clamped onto Kiana's arm, his fingers digging into her skin as he leaned in, his breath a sour mix of gin and overpriced steak. "You know," the guest whispered, "a girl with your memory shouldn't be wasting it on room numbers. You should be remembering my private cell." Kiana didn't flinch. With the practiced grace of a woman who had de-escalated international incidents over a breakfast buffet, she gripped the man's wrist and peeled his hand back. "Sir," she said, her voice a cool, resonant blade. "My memory is reserved for guest preferences, not guest propositions. Please maintain a professional distance." Bryce Calloway appeared as if summoned by the scent of a lost commission. He didn't ask for context. He saw a wealthy donor looking ruffled and a staff member standing her ground. To Bryce, hospitality meant total submission. "Kiana, apologize to Mr. Sterling immediately," Bryce hissed, his face turning a blotchy, panicked shade of magenta. "I won't apologize for refusing to be handled, Bryce." "It's Mr. Calloway," he bellowed, loud enough to stop a luggage cart. "You are disruptive and clearly don't understand the vibe of the new Harborview. Hand over your badge. You're fired. Security will see you to the curb." Kiana didn't argue. She unpinned the silver badge and placed it on the marble counter with a click that sounded like a gavel. She walked out with her spine like a steel rod, head held high, until she reached the service stairwell. There, hidden behind the heavy fire doors, she allowed herself exactly 4 minutes to let the hot, stinging tears fall. At the 4-minute mark, she wiped her face and adjusted her coat. She had a sister to feed, she simply didn't have the luxury of a 5th minute. The transition from the stairwell back to the staff quarters felt like walking through a house that had already forgotten she lived there. Kiana bypassed the lobby, where Bryce was likely still basking in the glow of his own perceived dominance, and descended into the basement. The locker room was a symphony of industrial hums and the distant slosh of laundry machines. As she pulled her personal bag from the metal cubby, she noticed a small, white shape perched precariously on her folded spare blazer. It hadn't been there this morning. It was a single origami crane, meticulously folded from a square of Harborview Grand notepad paper. The creases were so sharp they looked clinical, executed with a level of precision that felt strangely familiar. There was no note, no signature, and no frantic apology from a coworker. Kiana stared at it, her thumb hovering over the delicate paper wing. In the wreckage of her afternoon, a paper bird felt like a cruel irony, a fragile thing left in a place where she had just been crushed. She almost crumpled it, her hand tightening instinctively, before a sudden, illogical memory of 7:14 a.m. stopped her. She didn't throw it away. Instead, she tucked it into the side pocket of her bag, next to her keys, and walked out the staff exit without looking back. Outside, the parking structure was a cavern of concrete echoes and damp shadows. Submerged in the gloom of Level B, a black sedan sat idling, its exhaust a faint silver ghost in the chill air. Inside the pressurized silence of the back seat, Marcus Co sat motionless. He was on his phone, the low, rhythmic cadences of his Korean vibrating against the leather upholstery. He wasn't shouting, he was reciting a series of instructions with the cold, detached clarity of a man ordering a dinner he didn't intend to eat. The man on the other end of the line was clearly taking notes, the silence punctuated only by the occasional, sharp acknowledgement. Marcus didn't mention the firing. He didn't mention the VIP guest. He simply dictated 3 names and a set of coordinates for the city's harbor logistics. As the call ended, Marcus didn't immediately put the phone away. He swiped his thumb across the screen, pulling up a candid photo taken earlier that afternoon. It was the hotel lobby, timestamp 2:47 p.m. In the frame, Bryce Calloway looked triumphant, his blazer bunched at the shoulders, while Kiana stood with a steel rod spine, unpinning her life's work. Marcus stared at the image for a long beat, his expression a polished obsidian mask. He tapped the screen, deleting the image with a finality that felt like a sentence, and leaned back as the car pulled into the rain. The professional assassination of Kiana Dale unfolded in agonizing slow motion. Over the next week, the prestige of the Harborview Grand, which had once been her greatest credential, transformed into a lead weight. She sent out 34 applications, her resume a masterclass in high-stakes hospitality, and initially, the city seemed to agree. She secured 3 interviews at top-tier boutiques, but each followed a hauntingly identical script. The energy in the room would be electric, the managers nodding as she explained her philosophy on guest retention, until the moment they stepped out to conduct a final reference check. When they returned, the temperature in the room would drop 30 degrees. The smiles became brittle, replaced by vague, hollow excuses about internal restructurings or reconsidering the position. Bryce Calloway wasn't just firing her, he was poisoning the air she breathed. He was making sure that every door in Creston Bay didn't just close, but locked. "It's Bryce," Kiana muttered, slumped on the edge of the pull-out couch while Bria meticulously applied a shade of neon orange to her own nails that was legally bright enough to stop traffic. "He's calling them. He's telling them I'm a liability. I'm being ghosted by the entire service industry." Bria stopped mid-stroke, blowing on her pinky finger with a look of profound disappointment. "Kiana, you are a genius at managing rich people's tantrums, but you are a disaster at reading the room. Call the number on the black card." Kiana blinked, her brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "What black card?" "Bria, I have $42 and a bag of rice." "I don't have a black card." With a theatrical sigh, Bria reached into Kiana's discarded work bag and retrieved the origami crane. With the surgical dexterity of a woman who spent 8 hours a day handling delicate cuticles, Bria began to gently pull at the paper bird's wing. "You didn't even look inside, did you? You just saw a paper bird and thought, oh, how tragic and metaphorical." She reached into a hidden fold in the crane's belly and pulled out a small, matte black card. It was thick, heavy, and bore no name, only a single, embossed phone number in silver ink. Kiana stared at it, the heat of embarrassment creeping up her neck. She had carried that bird for 3 days, treated it like a fragile souvenir of her failure, and never once realized it was a delivery vehicle. I must have missed it in the basement," Kiana stammered, though both sisters knew she had simply been too overwhelmed to notice a literal lifeline. "Clearly," Bria remarked, returning to her nails. "Call it. Or text it. People with cards this expensive don't do small talk anyway." Kiana stared at that card for 48 hours. She watched her bank balance dwindle and watched Bria try to upcycle a cereal box into a designer clutch. Finally, at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, her pride snapped. She typed out a single, trembling text, "It's Kiana Dale." The response arrived in exactly 11 seconds. No greeting. No preamble. Just 4 words that made her heart skip a beat. "Are you okay, Kiana?" The meeting took place in a glass-walled office overlooking the harbor, a space so sterile and vast it felt like a cathedral dedicated to the god of logistics. Marcus Co sat behind a desk carved from a single slab of obsidian, looking less like a consultant and more like a king waiting for a report from the front lines. He didn't offer a handshake, he offered a seat and a cup of the 7:14 a.m. green tea, despite it being 3 in the afternoon. "I know what Calloway did," Marcus said, his voice a low, steady vibration that seemed to settle in the marrow of Kiana's bones. "I am also aware that the quiet doors of this city have been closing in your face. It is being handled. Bryce is currently occupied with a sudden, devastating audit of his personal and professional expenditures. He will be far too busy explaining his misplaced petty cash to bother with your references further." Kiana stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You did that?" "I merely accelerated the inevitable," Marcus replied, his expression as unreadable as the surface of the dark desk. "However, the Harborview is no longer a viable environment for you. My firm operates a private residential tower in the Harbor District. It requires a director of hospitality, someone who understands that service is not servility. I want you for the role." Kiana took a slow, measured breath. She had spent the morning practicing her professional armor, and she wasn't about to let it crack now. "No, Mr. CO. Thank you, but no." Marcus tilted his head, a ghost of a flicker in his obsidian eyes. "No?" "For 3 reasons," Kiana said, ticking them off on her fingers. "First, I don't take pity hires. Second, I am a concierge, not a corporate asset in a shadow war. And third, she paused, looking at the tea, you're offering me this because you want your morning routine back, and I refuse to be a high-end amenity in your life. I am a professional, not a luxury. She stood to leave, her spine a steel rod. Marcus didn't move. He simply looked at the clock. Give me 4 minutes. If you still wish to walk out, my driver will take you wherever you need to go. She stayed for 2 hours. The 4 minutes turned into a labyrinthine discussion about the tower's architecture, the psychology of elite hospitality, and a surprisingly heated debate over whether a lobby should smell like sandalwood or cedar. Marcus listened to every word with an intensity that was more intoxicating than the tea. Yet, when the sun dipped below the harbor line, Kiana still walked out of the building with her pride intact and her answer unchanged. On the drive home, Bria called immediately. Well? Are we moving into a penthouse or what? I said no, Kiana said, watching the city lights blur. To what, specifically? Bria asked, her tone sharpening with sister skepticism. Kiana opened her mouth to list the 3 reasons again, but the words died in her throat. She realized with a sudden, hollow jolt that she wasn't entirely sure what she had actually walked away from, or if Marcus had ever intended to let her say no in the first place. Kiana said yes on a drizzly Monday, primarily because Bria had spent the entire weekend accidentally leaving the electricity bill on the kitchen table like a silent accusation. She reported to the CO Group's harbor tower, a monolith of glass that seemed to hold the clouds captive. The interior was a masterpiece of cold efficiency, but the atmosphere was brittle. As Kiana walked through the lobby, she immediately discovered 3 things. First, the previous hospitality manager had left under mysterious circumstances, a phrase whispered by the receptionist with the kind of wide-eyed gravity usually reserved for ghost stories. Second, every staff member was vibrating with a quiet, bone-deep terror of getting a single detail wrong. The third discovery, however, was the one that truly defied logic. When Kiana pushed open the heavy oak doors to Marcus's private office, she prepared herself for a war room. She expected maps, monitors, and perhaps a discreetly placed holster. Instead, she found a botanical garden of the absurd. Marcus CO sat behind his obsidian desk, nearly obscured by a sprawling collection of greenery. 47 succulents, each in a unique, hand-labeled ceramic pot, lined the windowsills and bookshelves. There were echeverias, haworthias, and jagged aloes, all groomed with obsessive care. You're late, Marcus said, not looking up. He was currently using a pair of silver tweezers to remove a microscopic dead leaf from a plant labeled General Sherman. It is 8:59 a.m., Mr. CO. My start time is 9 o'clock, Kiana countered, walking closer to the desk. She squinted at the labels. Wait, are you naming them? Why is this one named the accountant? Marcus looked briefly caught, his composure flickering for the briefest of seconds. He set the tweezers down and cleared his throat, adjusting his cufflink. It was a stress management recommendation from my physician. Apparently, I am too high-strung for traditional hobbies. I've had them for 4 years. And? Does it help? Kiana asked, her voice tilting toward a laugh she was trying desperately to suppress. Marcus looked at the 47 silent witnesses of his temperament. I am not entirely sure yet. They are remarkably stubborn. This one, he gestured to a particularly prickly cactus, refuses to grow toward the light out of what I can only assume is pure spite. Much like the person I've just hired. Kiana didn't hold it back this time. She laughed, a bright, genuine sound that seemed to startle the very air in the sterile room. Marcus didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. He watched her with a strange, cataloging intensity, as if he were filing the exact frequency of the sound away in a vault. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was somehow worse than uncomfortable. It was the feeling of being the only thing in his world that he didn't know how to label or water. The tactical error occurred at 7 a.m. over a shared pot of coffee. Kiana, still adjusting to the dizzying pace of her new role, was double-checking her bag when she sighed. I'm leaving my salad on the counter, she muttered, nodding toward the fridge. But I don't have time to turn back once I'm at the harbor. The CO Group tower is a fortress, and I can't be a minute late. She hadn't realized Bria was truly listening until she saw the predatory, investigative gleam in her sister's eyes. Kiana left for work, thinking the conversation was forgotten. She didn't realize she had just handed Bria a golden ticket into the most private office in Creston Bay. By 1 p.m., Bria was standing in the marble lobby of the harbor tower. She didn't look like a delivery girl, she looked like a woman on a high-stakes mission, clutching the forgotten salad as if it contained state secrets. She watched the lobby flow with the sharp eyes of a nail tech who could spot a fake designer bag from 50 paces. She waited until she saw the man in the charcoal suit, the one Kiana had described as the ghost of Suite 1408, approaching the private elevator bank. She didn't hesitate. As Marcus CO stepped into the car, Bria slid in behind him, her neon pink tote bag clashing violently with the mahogany paneling. Marcus didn't even look at her at first, assuming she was a junior staffer, until Bria reached over and pressed the independent service button, bringing the car to a smooth, jarring halt between the 14th and 15th floors. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping into that terrifying, low rumble that usually ended negotiations. "The meaning is that my sister is too professional to ask you what your deal is, but I'm not," Bria said, crossing her arms. "I'm Bria. And you're the man who's been folding paper birds and consulting his way into her life. I need to know your intentions. Is this a job, or are you just lonely and obsessed with her tea-pouring skills?" Marcus looked as if he had been approached by a particularly aggressive species of tropical bird. "I am her employer. This is a professional arrangement." "That is not what I asked, Mr. CO, Bria replied, her voice dropping into a register of maternal authority. "I asked about your intentions. Because men like you don't burn down a general manager's career for a professional arrangement. You're either the hero or the villain in her story, and I need to know which one to dress for." Marcus was silent. He was not used to being interrogated in a 4x4 box. I am not sure I follow your line of questioning." "It's simple," Bria explained, speaking slowly as if to a child. "If you hurt her, I will find every succulent in your office and replace them with plastic fakes. You'll never know until they don't grow. Now, you're coming to dinner on Friday. 7 o'clock. Don't be late, my lasagna doesn't respect your schedule." By the time the elevator finally opened at the penthouse, Marcus looked physically drained. When he relayed the exchange to his second-in-command, Daniel, the man didn't reach for a security report, he reached for the edge of the desk to keep from falling over as he erupted into laughter. "She threatened the plants?" "Sir, she's a genius," Daniel gasped. "Can I come? I have to see you eat lasagna in a walk-up apartment." "No," Marcus snapped. "I'll bring the good scotch," Daniel countered. "No." Daniel came anyway. The dinner at Kiana's apartment was a collision of two worlds that should never have shared a zip code. The space was tiny, smelling of Bria's lavender candles and a lasagna that had been bubbling in the oven for 3 hours. Marcus CO sat on a kitchen chair that creaked ominously every time he moved, looking like a high-performance engine trying to idle in a school zone. Beside him, Daniel looked entirely too comfortable, having already charmed Bria by identifying the exact, cheap vintage of the emergency wine she'd pulled from the back of the cupboard. Kiana watched in a state of suspended disbelief as Marcus, the man who moved the city's invisible levers, carefully navigated a piece of garlic bread. He looked deeply out of place, yet he didn't look unhappy. Every time Bria made a particularly sharp joke at Marcus's expense, Kiana saw his shoulders drop just a fraction. She was counting, he had chuckled twice. Real, soft sounds that actually reached his eyes. "So, Daniel," Bria said, leaning on her elbows, "is he always this stiff, or does he just have a succulent leaf stuck somewhere uncomfortable?" Daniel snorted into his wine. "Usually, he's a statue. But you should have seen him last year, Bria. When the waterfront situation was peaking? He didn't sleep for 3 weeks. He was basically a shark in a charcoal suit. The air in the room didn't just cool, it crystallized." Marcus went perfectly still, his fork hovering a centimeter above his plate. The waterfront situation wasn't just a business deal, it was the period of time Kiana remembered from the news as a hostile corporate restructuring that had left several prominent harbor figures in permanent, untraceable retirement. Daniel, realizing he had crossed an invisible line, tried to pivot. I mean, the logistics were very complex. Lots of spreadsheets. Spreadsheets, Kiana repeated quietly. She looked at Marcus. He wasn't looking at his lasagna anymore. He was looking at her, and for the first time, the consultant mask was completely gone. In its place was something much older and more dangerous. The rest of the night was a masterclass in forced politeness. Kiana played the gracious host, but her mind was cataloging every mysterious thing she had ignored, the crisp $100 tips, the lack of a digital footprint, and the way the entire harbor tower staff held their breath when he walked by. When the door finally closed behind them, Kiana didn't start the dishes. She sat at the table and stared at the empty seat where Marcus had been. She realized then that Bria was right, she was either in the middle of a fairy tale or a very high-end crime syndicate. Bria, Kiana said, her voice steady. Tomorrow, I'm going into his office. And I'm not leaving until I see the spreadsheets Daniel was talking about. Kiana didn't knock. She entered Marcus's office with the silent, pressurized energy of a storm front, ignoring the panicked stuttering of his assistant. Marcus was at his desk, his fingers hovering over the spine of a jagged aloe plant, but he didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting for the floor to drop out from under him. The waterfront situation, Marcus, she said, her voice a cool, resonant blade. I want to know who you are when you aren't pretending to be a consultant who can't keep a cactus alive. I want the truth, and I want it without the corporate seasoning. Marcus leaned back, the shadows of the harbor tower carving his face into something ancient and severe. He didn't blink. He spoke with a clinical, terrifying honesty, detailing an organization that functioned as the invisible scaffolding of Creston Bay. It wasn't the crude, cinematic world of street brawls and back alleys, it was a sophisticated machine of logistics, debt management, and quiet exits. He described a world where power was a series of silent levers, and he was the one who decided which ones to pull to keep the city from cannibalizing itself. It is not entirely unlike the movies, Marcus admitted, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers. But it is far more paperwork and significantly less dramatic lighting. Most of my day is spent convincing men that their survival is more profitable than their ego. I don't kill people, Kiana. I simply make it so they no longer exist in the world they recognize. And Suite 1408. Kiana stepped closer, her shadow falling across his desk. 2 years of green tea at 7:14 a.m. Was that just a reconnaissance mission? Marcus's expression fractured. A rare, jagged look of vulnerability crossed his face. That was the only part of my life that wasn't a performance. No power, no obligation, no one trying to leverage my position. Just a cup of tea brought by someone who did her job with excellence because she chose to, not because she was terrified of what I could do to her. For 2 years, you were the only person in this city who didn't want anything from me. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small, unfinished square of paper. The crane. I folded that in the lobby while watching Bryce Calloway dismantle your life. I've spent 20 years learning how to control every variable, yet in that minute, I didn't know what to do with my hands. I was angry. Not the cold, tactical anger I use for business. It was something primal. He set the paper down. I have told you what I am. Now, tell me what you want to do with that. Do you want to walk out? I'll make sure you never worry about rent again. Kiana was quiet for a long time. She looked at the 47 succulents, the only living things he hadn't mastered, then at the man who commanded a city but was currently waiting for her judgment. She didn't want his charity, and she certainly didn't want his guilt. I don't want to be your director of hospitality, Marcus, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, steady hum. And I refuse to be your conscience. If I stay, I want a seat at the table where the levers are. I want to be the one who decides who gets a second chance and who gets the quiet exit. I want the power you used to save me, but I want it in my own hands. Marcus stared at her, a slow, dark smile finally breaking across his face, the first she had ever truly seen. In that case, he said, we're going to need a much larger desk. 1 year later, the city of Creston Bay still smelled of salt and secrets, but the power had shifted into a new, more elegant alignment. The CO Group's harbor tower was no longer just a monolith of glass, it was the birthplace of the Dale Standard, a hospitality brand that had redefined the city's elite service. Kiana now operated out of her own corner suite on the floor below Marcus, where the air was scented with expensive cedar and autonomy. On her desk sat 2 succulents Marcus had sent her on her first day as director. He had left them nameless, a silent peace offering, so she had dubbed them the Audacity and the Negotiator. The local social landscape had transformed in ways that defied even Marcus's cold logic. Most baffling was the union of Bria and Daniel. Against all odds, they were dating. Bria had successfully convinced the city's most feared second-in-command that his charcoal suits were spiritually oppressive, and Daniel was now frequently seen in the harbor district wearing pastel linen blazers that made Marcus physically wince. As for Bryce Calloway, his quiet exit had been surgical. He was now the general manager of a mid-tier extended-stay property located conveniently near the airport's noisiest runway. Stripped of his gold-leaf placard and his dignity, Bryce had turned to amateur watercolor painting. He spent his afternoons painting blurry, distorted landscapes of the harbor he was no longer allowed to touch, a fitting, low-stakes penance for a man who had mistaken a blazer for a crown. Yet, some habits were impossible to give up. Every third week, Suite 1408 at the Harborview Grand sat empty, reserved under MCO, consultant. It remained a silent shrine to the days when a paper crane was the only lifeline they had. At the harbor tower, the morning ritual had evolved into a shared sanctuary. At exactly 7:14 a.m., Kiana would walk into Marcus's office, not with a servant's tray, but with 2 identical ceramic cups. She would take her seat across from him at the obsidian desk, the steam rising between them like a silver ribbon. I checked on the Negotiator before I came up, Kiana remarked one Tuesday, taking a slow sip of her tea. She's looking a little dry. I think she's mirroring your mood regarding the harbor expansion. Marcus glanced up from his monitor, a rare, genuine smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. I was unaware my mood had a botanical counterpart. Perhaps I should spend more time in your office. Perhaps you should, Kiana teased, her eyes meeting his over the rim of the cup. They sat in the quiet of the morning, 2 architects of a city's shadows. She no longer brought the tea because she had to, she brought it because in a world of calculated power, these 10 minutes were the only thing that was real. Late never once.